And welcome to the Morning Huddle. I'm your host, Devin Roy, and joining me on the show today is founder and owner of iMEO Company, Eric Wright. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Hey, Devin. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Why don't we start by you just telling us about yourself?
Yeah, so I always start with college because that's kind of where this idea came from. So I graduated from a small school called Belmont Abbey College in Belmont, Mount Holly. Most people probably haven't heard of it, but I majored in psychology there, where I first came across organizational psychology. From there, I got my first real job in corporate doing staffing. So I was able to progress in there, become the team lead. And then since then, I've done a variety of jobs like business process mapping, operations analyst, now PMO lead. And then that kind of brought me into my company, iMEO. Kind of more on the education piece, I have my Lean Six Sigma certification from Villanova University. And I'm actually on my second to last week of my MBA from Jack Welch Management Institute. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you. It's been a long journey, but it's been really beneficial.
Excellent. So what was the inspiration for iMEO? Did I say it correctly?
Yeah. So iMEO, it actually stands for something. So it stands for Improving Management, Employees, and Organizations. And really, it started with that piece at Belmont Abbey where I learned a lot about organizational psychology through a thesis paper that I did. So the topic that I really learned about was the happy, productive worker thesis. And it's really how your life satisfaction comes into play with your job satisfaction and your performance. So that was a piece of the puzzle. Another piece was during that time at a staffing firm, I experienced just really not good management, to put it in a nice way, where I could even see the best people just lose motivation. Even people that love to come to work, love to work with the people that they were working with, but their performance just suffered because of the type of management that was there. So those two things, in combination with just loving business, really sparked the idea for iMEO.
Got it. How long have you been doing it for now?
So technically, I started it this year. But I've been working with clients kind of more as an independent consultant for roughly 3-4 years. Established this year, but a little bit longer in the terms of doing that type of work.
Got it. So tell us a little bit more about what you do with these companies you've worked with in the past.
Yeah, so we have a type of framework that we created, and it's a 4-step process, but it's a lot more detailed than that. But
sure.
we always
just give us a teaser.
Yeah. I'll give you the brief version. So we start with an organizational needs assessment, and that might sound scientific, but it's really just going into the organization, talking to the owner, talking to the employees, figuring out what the organization actually needs. And with iMEO, you heard the management employee piece. So that's going to be the people. So we focus on people, process, and purpose. And so management and employees, that's going to be the part that we're focusing on for the people. So if the assessment says, okay, well, it's not necessarily the processes that are in need. It's the people. That's who we're going to focus on. So leadership development, or maybe it's employee training, or whatever the case might be, to increase that satisfaction and productivity. And then the last part of that is organization. And that's where the process and the purpose is going to come into play. So if an organization doesn't have a vision that they use to guide them, then we're going to talk to them about that. We're going to figure out what it is that we can do to help them improve. So that's the first step, organizational needs assessment. From there, kind of going into that, we're going to go into the strategy intervention. So what is it that we can bring to the table to help you in those specific areas that we defined in the first step? And then the third step is the actual strategy implementation. And then the fourth step is, I think, important because a lot of consultants or coaches, they'll go in and they won't follow up or really see the results. So the last part is the results evaluation. So where we started to where we are now, how are we able to help you? Because ultimately, the client's success is our success.
Are you giving them like a 30, 60, 90-day plan, or when do you expect to see results?
So it's very customized right now, because I think whenever you're talking with people, it's kind of difficult to put specific timelines on it. We definitely want to see it as soon as possible, but we don't necessarily have a specific 30, 60, 90-day approach, just because with people it is very, people are kind of a tough product, you know?
Sure.
So it's a little bit tough to put that on there, but we do have different types of things that we'll do, depending on what it is that we're going to try to improve.
Right. So let me ask what might sound like a stupid question, but I think everyone has a different opinion on this. Why is it important to have happy employees?
Well, I think there's a lot of different things. So the big one is you can reduce the hiring, you can reduce the turnover, and having a satisfied employee, I think, should be part of your strategic plan, because the more satisfied an employee is, the more productive that they're going to be. And I also have an argument where it's not just enough to have a satisfied employee. You need to have that employee to have life satisfaction. So what I really want to try to do is create a way for employees to not, because we talk about work-life balance a lot, and I don't think that exists either. I think that everybody has their own balance, and you have to be able to create that. And going back to the question on the timeline, if we're talking about individuals, well, then those individuals are probably going to have different ways of viewing things. I follow Patrick Lencioni, which is he's the I think he's the CEO of Table Group, but he has tons of culture and leadership books. And what they really talk about is like you can't just have one specific thing for for a whole team. You have to have different things that are going to cater to different people to see the actual results. So a lot of companies, they'll do the employee engagement survey, and they'll say, okay, well, we're this % engaged and we need to work on this, but that's very generalized, and people aren't really the type of product to be generalized.
Yeah. Do you think people are really honest with those surveys anyway?
Well, it depends. I think if they're having a good time, then I think they're very honest. If not, and they're leaving, then they're probably honest.
Sure.
But if they're not having a good time and they're staying, they're probably not going to say what's on their mind. So
you could probably figure out who it is, right? If you depending on the verbatims and what have you.
Yeah, it also depends on the size of the company, because if you have a smaller, because I did this before where there was a team of 19 people, and you couldn't get specifics, but any lower than that, let's say that there's 10 people on the team, and especially if you include titles, so you probably want to avoid that. But you can definitely see, like, if there's one team lead and that team lead says something, obviously it's them. So you got to be careful about that too. And there's a lot of legality in there too, because I had to work with HR managers and business partners to get those employee engagement surveys out there. But yeah.
So what's your advice for creating an engaged workforce then? So
going back to Patrick Lencioni, I'm going to sound like I'm taking his work, but
that's okay.
That's kind of what I base it off of. And I actually took some notes down here, so because I like to prepare.
Sure.
Because I didn't want to say the wrong thing or anything like that. But
You're
actually,
fine.
the first thing that you want to do is start with creating trust in your organization. Because if you don't have trust in your organization or your team, then bringing engagement into there is just not going to work. So let's say that we just met and you're on my team, and let's say I'm the manager, you're the employee, and I come up to you and say, hey, tell me about everything about you. And you're gonna be hesitant, right? And so one of the ways to create that trust is for the leader to start with that. So in the same example, if I said, hey, I'm Zach, I've been here for 5 years, I have a family back at home in Charlotte, and all these different kind of things, and I'm being vulnerable, now you're going to react a little bit differently than the way that I approached it first. So it always starts with building that trust, and it's kind of amazing to me that teams don't take this upon themselves to do it more often, because it is fairly simple, but it does take a little bit of time.
Yeah.
And then the next one, once you have that trust, in Patrick Lencioni's book, it's the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and he talks about the fear of conflict. So if you don't have the trust in your team, and the team doesn't trust you, then you're not going to have conflict. And a lot of people steer away from that word, because they think that it's an argument, but it's not necessarily an argument. Whenever you have conflict in a team, it allows you to actually make decisions faster. It allows you to get to the root causes faster too. Because here's the thing: if you don't have that conflict in front of the team, then somebody's going to have it behind, in the back of the room or at the water cooler, and it's going to transcend all these kind of gossip areas, and that's just not going to be good for anything, right?
Yeah. Because part of the subculture.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that those are the 2 key areas to bring engagement in. And some people might disagree with that, because it's tough to have conflict, and it's tough to build trust. But those 2 are really the foundation. And if you don't have the foundation, then a lot of things can fall through the crack. And then whenever we talk about like corporations, a lot of corporations will talk about short-term gains, right? So they might miss the trust to hit the goal, or they might miss the conflict to get the goal. But in the long term, it's going to turn around and bite them in the butt. Yeah. So that's what I would say. There's 3 others here, just to run through them. I won't go too into detail, but lack of commitment. So once you have the conflict, there's something called disagree and commit. So you and I can have a conversation about a decision that we're trying to make for a strategic plan, and I can disagree, and maybe your idea is better. I can disagree, but I can say, okay, I don't necessarily think that this is the right way, but I'm committed to this. So moving outside of this room, I'm committed to this. I'm not going to badmouth you. I'm going to tell my team that, yes, we got to go ahead and do this. This is the goal. And that's what it means by disagree and commit. Avoidance of accountability, and then the last one is inattention to results. So if you have the first 3, and then you don't have accountability, then nobody's really holding anybody accountable for what it is that we agreed upon, and then that's not going to get done. So then you can't really focus on the results. So that was a long answer, but I think all those things come together to have a cohesive team. And the more that you know about people, which goes back to trust, the know about your team, you're going to have better engagement and more satisfied employees, and ultimately better productivity because of it.
Yeah, I think it's important also for the leader to model this behavior that you're talking about. I, like you, I believe in conflict. I think it's healthy. We debate not to argue, but to get closer to what the truth is or what the answer is, right?
Exactly.
And that's why we do it. So what are your thoughts? I mean, I like to for example, when you have a team, and I've managed so many teams over the years, Zach, let me tell you, more than I care to remember. But sometimes when you're coming into a new team, you're trying to get that debate going. It doesn't happen. I like to play devil's advocate. And argue the opposite, point to kind of get the conversation going. What are your thoughts on that tech?
Yeah, I think it's good, especially if nobody's talking. It's not because nobody has anything to say. It's because they're waiting for somebody to speak up. So even if you're not playing devil's advocate, you can spark the conversation. One of the things that I mentioned, or I think I did, is the leader speaks first, and the leader has to be vulnerable. So if it's a tough conversation and you're playing devil's advocate, you can still be sincere about it, right? I think that's another misconception is you have to be mean to be a good manager, but I just think that's wrong. But yeah, I think playing devil's advocate can get the situation started. But whenever you're playing devil's advocate as the leader, you have to be careful too, because I can't remember the acronym. I think it's HIPPO, but it's like the highest paid person in the room. I know that doesn't make sense, but I've heard it before. But whenever that highest paid person in the room speaks, a lot of people, it turns into groupthink, where everybody's agreeing because that person is the highest paid person in the room. They don't want to go against them because then they might lose their job or they might get punished.
Right.
So it all goes back to that trust. So if somebody's not speaking up, that trust that you have to establish first, it could happen outside of that meeting or those meetings. It could be on one-on-ones, but allowing the team to be able to say something without feeling like they're going to be punished in return is something huge that I think that you have to think about, where maybe you don't have to play devil's advocate in that situation because the team is going to speak up already.
Got it. So we're talking about happy employees. You had something on your website about employee assessment, team assessment.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
So there's a team assessment, and that is going to it's going to help with kind of what we talked about, the team cohesiveness. So the team will take that, we'll review the data, we'll look at certain areas that where they might have scored strong on, where they might have scored weak on, and then we'll use that data to go in and form that strategy intervention. The organizational health assessment really determines the health of an organization, and that can be anything from like the communication of the organization, or it could be the process of the organization, or it could be the employees themselves as far as productivity. And then the employee assessment is more individually based, where we're looking at how the leaders can interact with their employees better. There's other things that you can use, like Myers-Briggs. There's a DISC assessment out there.
Yep. Did you take that one?
I did, but it's been a while. So if you ask me, I don't know the answer.
So I was a 0 on that DISC assessment.
Oh, really?
A 0. So it goes, 1 to 60 that way and 1 to 60 this way. Creative versus the pragmatist.
Oh, so right in the middle.
I was right in the middle. The guy said I'd only met one other 0 in my life. So.
That's cool. I like taking those assessments and being unique.
Exactly. I'm not sure what that means, though.
Yeah, it could be good, it could be bad, but it's something to talk about.
Exactly. So, can anyone be a leader? What percent of it is? Let me ask it this way.
Yeah.
What percent of it is learned behavior versus innate ability?
So I think to answer the first question and to follow up with that, I think anybody can be a leader, but they have to be willing to put in the work. It's funny that you asked that, because to get into JWMI, we had to answer that question. Are leaders born or are they made? And my response was, I think I remember it was 3 years ago, but my response was, I think that they're born, but they have to work to actually become what they were born to be. So I think even if leaders don't start out until later in life, I think there was something inside of them that was telling them, like, hey, I'm a leader. I have something, because I've always felt like a pull to want to help people, to want to kind of teach and coach people. So I think there's an innate feeling that you have, but if you don't work on it, then it's not going to be beneficial for anybody. And if you're not beneficial to other people, you're not really a leader.
Yeah, that's the thing I always say to people. If you don't have an inclination to help others, and put others before self, then you're going to have a hard time being a leader.
Yeah,
you might be a top producer, right? But that doesn't make you a leader. And we tend to make the mistake of promoting the top producer, right, into the leadership role. But they're all about self. Yeah. Right? Which is nothing wrong with that, because it makes them successful in what they do, but it won't make them a good leader. And that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, no, I was about to dive into that too because it's almost like a pet peeve to me because we do tend to promote the top performers, and now not all top performers are selfish or they're not all about themselves. Some top performers are the reason that they're top performers is because they were able to help other people, and by helping other people, they learned other things.
Correct.
But yeah, I've been in sales oriented organizations, and you get 4 top performing quarters, you go to the next level, then you do it again, you go to the next level, and then that next level is a manager. And not everybody wants to be that, you know, but the way that society frames it is if you want to be successful, then the next step is probably that leader. But yeah, it's kind of a pet peeve to me because organizations do tend to promote the loudest person in the room. But a great example, and I'm not a sports person, so don't dive in too deep here.
That's
but,
okay.
Shane Battier, Adam Grant talks about him.
Yeah.
So whenever he was playing for, I think the Heat, and LeBron was on there, if you look, there was an adjustment from LeBron's game, and then they started winning, and it was because Shane Battier was studying the data. He was in the background. I think he's been called like the greatest basketball player, non-statistic greatest basketball player. But it's because he got the other people around him to think differently. He's like, hey, if you just angle your arm this way a little bit, then it's going to switch up their shot. And from that, I mean, he was able to coach from the background and still have the top performers out there. So those are the type of people that organizations really need to start looking at if they want to build better teams, is the people in the background that don't necessarily have an ego. They just are all about the team. They're all about the company. And you're going to see a tremendous change in success just from that story alone.
Yeah, that's a good point. Shane Battier, I wonder what he's doing now.
I don't know. I haven't seen him in a while.
Let's talk about situational leadership. I posted something today. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at it.
I glanced at it a little bit.
Yeah, about leadership, because my whole thought about leadership is that it's situational. It's not about saying I'm a servant leader or I'm this kind of leader. It's about being the kind of leader you need to be for an individual or for the moment, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes it may be good to be a servant leader, but sometimes you may have to be autocratic. And I know it gets a bad rap, but sometimes that's necessary to do that, right?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
No, I definitely agree 100%. And I can explain it with an example. So whenever I became the team lead at the staffing firm that I talked about, I was given 5 employees who were underperforming. I'm not sure why they gave me them, but I looked at it as a challenge. And each person was different. I mean, it was a very diverse team. And I didn't start going in there with, hey, look, this is the process that we have to do. Which, if we talk about the mission of iMEO, we actually use effective rather than efficient, which we can get into. But I didn't go in there and say, hey, this is the process that you got to do. You got to do this, this, and this, and then we'll end up here. But it was more so, who are we as a people, a collective people? Who are we individually? And then how can we use that to our advantage? So it's kind of like a basketball reference, because you have 5 people on the court, but not all of them are good at shooting. Not all of them are good at rebounding. Not all of them can dunk, you know? So I don't know why I'm using so many sports references.
That's okay.
Sports, but that's kind of the way that I looked at it. And one of the things that I really utilized was my one-on-one conversations. And then I had a team meeting every Monday, and to get people motivated and inspired, I had a theme of the week. So it might have been something that I listened to on a podcast. It might have been something that I was reading in a leadership book, and then that would be the theme. And we would tailor what our goals were for that week. And then in the one-on-ones, I would talk individually to the people. So there was one example of somebody that I was managing, and his numbers were really low, and kind of going back to the myths of what managers should do versus what they actually should do, is so whenever I talk to him, instead of saying, hey, your numbers are low, you need to get them up, like, what's wrong? I started asking him, I was like, hey, is everything okay? What's going on here? Is there any way that I can help you? And I think a lot of managers don't ask those types of questions. I feel like the managers that I've had, I've always had to ask, like, hey, how can I help you? So whenever I was able to ask that, we were able to form his own purpose. So he wasn't in staffing as a career. That wasn't what his goal was. His goal was to own his own gym, be a personal trainer, and be able to create that. So I was able to take his passions and connect it to the work that he was doing, going back to the situational leadership. What was it that he was trying to learn that we could coach him on and make it apply to the actual position that he was doing to increase his productivity? I did that for the whole team, and the whole team ended up being top performers or performers within that 3-month quarter. So I definitely believe in situational leadership.
Yeah, I think you keep using sports analogy because they're apt. They're really good. Because if you have a team, you're gonna have people with different strengths, but everyone has to know their role on the team, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the same thing for an organization. And so you can't have all the same types of personality or everyone with the same strengths working on one team. They have to complement each other, which gives you the optimal results that you're looking for.
Yeah, I agree.
So don't apologize for the sports info there. They've been really good so far. Good, so let's take a pause here for just a second and see if we have any questions from the audience. And how can we, again, let's tell everyone how they can find you and you know, on Instagram, on your website.
Okay. So yeah, my Instagram handle is Zach A. Wright. And then pretty much everything else is iMEO Company. So imeocompany.com is the website. I have imeo.thinkific.com, which is my online course. It's called Business Built to Last. And we also have a Instagram page for that. It's business_built_to_last. But then LinkedIn, Facebook is iMEO Company. So if you type in iMEO Company, you should be able to find us.
Got it. All right. If you have any questions, hit the question mark. Let's try that this time, this week, guys. Hit the question mark and ask your question for Zach or myself, and we'll try to get it answered as quickly as possible. Why don't we wrap up with some coaching? And It wasn't on the agenda, but I think I'll throw it in because thoughts on coaching. I have my own perspective. Just to give you a little bit about my background, I'm in retail. I started my career in asset protection. One of the things I used to do is interrogate people. I went from that to operations, merchandising. I'm a store manager now. I've been a store manager of 7 stores, so I've been doing this for a long time. But the interrogation piece never left me. Because what I learned from that is you can take that and apply it to coaching, because it really is 2 sides of the same coin. Because in coaching, we're trying to modify behavior, right? We're trying to get someone to admit they need to change their behavior first. And in interrogations, you're trying to get someone to admit they've done something wrong. And so the process by which you do that can be the same. And it's very much like you described. It's not about slamming your fist on the table and telling me. It's about connecting with that person and getting them. But so talk to me about, what's your philosophy on coaching?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back into, so when you mention interrogation, I think of psychology. So like I mentioned, I majored in psychology. So being able to understand people and their reactions is key to coaching, I think, because if you're able to see something that somebody else isn't able to see in themselves, then that's where a coach can really come into play. And whenever I'm speaking of coaching, I'm specifically speaking of life and business coaching, just from my aspect. But yeah, because if you're able to bring awareness to somebody's weaknesses that they can't see, then you're ultimately going to make them better. And going back to the sports, I think that's what coaches do. A lot of people will look at like Phil Jackson and they'll say, well, why does Kobe need a coach? You know, he's like one of the greatest, or Michael Jordan, or whoever it is that comes up in that conversation. Well, they need a coach because they don't know everything. not everybody knows everything. And that's my take on coaching is, even coaches need coaches, you know? So I think that's what I would have to say about coaching is I think it's very beneficial. I've talked in certain groups where a lot of people will talk about a business coach and they'll say like, it's kind of like, well, they're a business coach because they couldn't be successful in their own business. But I don't think that's necessarily it. I think that you have to have somebody there, and a coach could honestly be your significant other. It could be your friends. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who's so much more smarter than you, you know. But yeah, I think just tying it all together is interrogation and psychology, and being able to read the things that they can't read for themselves is very beneficial.
Yeah, it's just all about leading people to self-discovery.
Yeah, yeah.
Really, that's really what it's all about, because, you know, people, you know, we all have our abilities to learn, and we have, you know, limits. We all have limits to what we can do.
Yeah.
I can't make someone smarter. You can't make me smarter. But you can unlock, right, my understanding about things and let me live up to my fullest potential. That's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
And so if I am smarter than you, let's say, and I try to coach you as if I'm talking to myself, you're going to miss the point, right?
Yeah,
so it's about me helping you, you know, understand to the best of your ability and leading you to that self-discovery. And I can't do that if I'm inserting myself into the conversation, but I have to ask you the questions that get you there. And that's what coaching is all about.
Exactly. And another thing that is key with coaching is, from the student's perspective, you have to be willing to learn. Because if you're not willing to learn, then all those
100%.
words, all those guidance, reference, it's just going to go in one ear and out the other. So
absolutely. A very good point. All right. I'm here with Zach Wright. We've been talking about his organization and what they do, and had a great conversation with you tonight, Zach. I appreciate you coming on. Anything else you want to share before we go?
One thing that we didn't mention is the mission of the company, and that's to build a world where organizations operate effectively and treat others appropriately. And
I love that.
It's kind of funny that has to be a mission, but that's one of the things that we really want to achieve. And we focus on smaller businesses and startups because we think if we can start there, and if they grow and expand, then it'll have a greater impact over time.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny is that the smaller companies, I think, is where you see this the most, because these are individuals who were entrepreneurial in their thinking and very aggressive and assertive, probably in their personality.
Yeah.
And that doesn't always translate well from an HR perspective, right? So
yeah. Exactly.
They need folks like you to come in and help them, you know, fix those things, put in the structures, the organization in place. So.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on, Zach.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was fun.
Of course. Let's do it again, okay?
All right, I will.
All right. Take care of yourself, okay?
All right. Bye.
Bye.